Welcome, everybody. Today, my guest is author and consultant, I guess you'd call you, teacher, trainer, Rebecca Consultant. Let me read a little bit about her. Rebecca is the author of Hey, Are You Listening to Me? Listen Your Way to Professional and Personal Success. Her book has been used globally by businesses to improve communication in the workplace and in workshops for couples and families. She's a former speaker and has spoken to businesses and organizations on how to improve communication and listening skills. And for all of you who know anything about my work, it's pretty obvious why I'm having her on the show. We have a couple of listener experts here to inform you about the importance of listening. So, Rebecca, a warm welcome, and we're going to have a great conversation over the next 20 or 30 minutes.
Oh, thank you, Doug. Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. So tell us a little bit about yourself, your backstory, especially, and then how you got into studying and teaching listening.
Yeah. When you say backstory, you mean just a little bit about
Just a little bit about yourself, yeah.
Yeah. I grew up in rural New Hampshire, and we had quite a bit of acreage, and a lot of it was wooded. So I was a tree climber and loved to play by streams and play in woods. And I raised chickens and had lots of pets, and all of that really contributed to my love of the outdoors and nature and animals. Um, an event that really formed me. I wasn't raised with a lot of confidence and self-esteem. So when I graduated from college and all of my friends were having job interviews with companies, I decided to just take off with a backpack and travel. And I started in Greece and did a lot of traveling in the Far East. And that was before cell phones, and I didn't own a credit card, and I didn't have much money. So, not feeling really strongly about myself as a person, that was when I look back on that, I'm amazed that I did that. And like I said, it formed me in a lot of ways. It helped me gain a lot of confidence in myself. I worked where I could so I could continue traveling. I had no agenda, ran out of money a couple of times and slept outside here and there. But it really gave me a lot of confidence in myself and my abilities.
And when you came back to the United States, what happened next?
When I came back to the US, with that kind of newfound adventurous spirit, I tried a lot of different things. I got involved in some interesting sports. I hang glided for a little bit. I flew small planes and started parachuting, started jumping out of airplanes and doing skydiving. And I fell head over heels in love with that. And
Wow.
I ended up doing that for quite a few years. And I traveled to different parts of the country to chase the weather, kind of, and just, jump when I could.
Well, we have that in common because I'm a instrument rated private pilot, multi-engine,
Oh,
tail wheel, and I also fly helicopters. So
oh, wow. Oh, I
I've
didn't
got a
know
lot of
that.
rating.
That's
Yeah,
amazing.
yeah. I've
Wow.
got a little RV6 two-seater experimental that I fly.
Oh, wow. Oh,
Yeah.
that's neat. Yeah. Oh, good for you.
So how did you get into listening? What prompted you to start studying listening and then writing your book?
Yeah, throughout my life, I thought that I was a decent listener, like many of us do.
That's right.
And and really where it was all born from is this was many, many years ago, but I had a very successful practice doing hypnotherapy with clients. And the very first appointment, the intake initial appointment, it would usually last for a while. It would go an hour and a half, 2 hours easily. But I asked a lot of questions. I really dug deep. And I have a teacher that used to call it listening on sword point. And
Ooh, I
isn't
like
that
that.
isn't that great? And what he meant by that was actively listening with my whole body, asking questions to gain more clarity, to dig a little bit deeper, and also listening for inconsistencies in what the client was saying versus what they were actually doing. So I felt like a detective sometimes with how I was listening, but I learned really quickly that so many people are really hungry to be heard, to be
Oh,
understood. Yeah, to have,
oh man,
yeah,
ever. I mean, I completely agree with you. The just to riff on that for a second, what I found, same thing as you. Number one, most people don't feel emotionally safe. They don't feel validated. They don't feel heard. And in my research, I find that people really start feeling isolated and alone between 6 and 8 years old, when they start learning that the world is an emotionally unsafe place to be, and they become emotionally defensive and withdrawn.
Wow.
And just like you, people want to be heard. And when you can provide that service, they just are so grateful.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I discovered completely by accident, I feel. But that's what I discovered during my practice was we hadn't even started really doing the work yet, but people would feel amazing after that initial appointment because they felt understood and validated, and I was
Yeah.
really interested in everything they had to say. So that was the book really was born from those years of
Wow.
doing that.
So you call listening on the edge of a sword. I call it listening other people into existence.
Oh, I like that better.
I use that because it's been my experience when we're listening to emotions, which is what I teach, that people feel heard, deeply heard for the first time. They are actually literally listened into existence. In fact, I came up with that phrase. I was training at a middle school, teaching teachers how to listen to their kids' emotions, their students' emotions. And we were doing in the training, I did a circle, a peace circle, to show teachers how to use peace circles in their classrooms for classroom control and community building. And one of the women participating in the circle was a school administrator, not a principal, or she was from the main office. At the end of the circle, when we debriefed, she said, "That's the first time I've ever felt deeply listened to in my life. For the first time, I feel like I was listened into existence." And I picked that phrase. I think that was in 2015, and that's how I picked up that phrase.
That's a great phrase, and that's so beautiful.
Well,
Yeah.
that's the power. That's the power of all of this. Why do you? I mean, we're talking about this. Both of our experiences are that listening is so powerful when it's done right, and yet people are not motivated to learn, or they don't know how to learn, or they just dismiss it as something that is a skill that they have to pick up. What you're thinking about that?
Yeah, it makes me think about what you said a couple of minutes ago about a lot of things starting when we're 6, 8 years old, around
Right.
that time. I think that that's when a lot of good habits could be instilled at that young age. But I just think, especially nowadays, everybody's so busy, and the busyness externally contributes to our internal busyness. And the mind is just like such an antagonistic little in trouble, blah, 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 blah. It's always going. So I don't understand why this super valuable skill wouldn't be focused on more and taught more, if not in youth and childhood, at least as we get older, in other venues.
I think that it's a combination of a lot of factors. I think that when you are truly listening to somebody, you have to be present and authentic and vulnerable yourself. And that means you have to have a certain amount of emotional maturity, or what I call emotional competency. And if you don't have that competency, then your mind is going to drift. I mean, I think you've made in the Authority Magazine article that we did together, you made a really good point about how we get distracted. And there's actually research now that shows that what happens in a conversation is if we're having a conversation and we're not skilled, you could say something to me that triggers me emotionally, and my brain just takes off somewhere else, and I completely lose my capacity to pay attention to you, because I don't have the emotional maturity or competency to deal with that emotional reactivity. And I think,
Yeah.
and that's why people interrupt, I think, is because they get this emotional reaction and they have no impulse control because their prefrontal cortex is shut down. And so they just blurt out stuff. And I think that really contributes a lot to the poor listening skills that we see around us all the time.
Yeah, I think that's really insightful, Doug. And I think that's definitely one of the reasons why people can't really hear, or they interrupt, when they get triggered like that, like you said. And I think that all of the internal dialogue that happens within one's own mind causes a lot of interruption as well. You know, if you're thinking about what you want to say, you've got something really good and important to say, and you don't want to forget it. So you rehearse it in your mind and just waiting for that pause so you can say what you want to say.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's again, it's impulse control. It's me too, me too, me too.
Yes.
And so we spend more time thinking about what we're going to say next than we spend really listening to other people. That's why when I teach people how to listen to emotions, the very first thing I say is ignore the words. Just completely ignore the words. It just becomes white noise. And
So
when you stop paying attention to the words, now you can focus on the emotions. And what's really amazing is if all you do is focus on the emotional experience that the speaker is having, you'll remember the words, because learning is associated with emotion.
I really like that. So when you say that, do you mean the words are there and they'll come, you're retaining them, but do you mean kind of watching the person's reactivity or facial expressions or their body language? Is that what
Yep,
you mean?
all of it, all of that and more. Our brains are hardwired to read emotions because of evolutionary biology. And we didn't even have vocabulary or the ability to speak in less than 230,000 years ago, which is an eye blink.
Yeah, yeah.
So before that, for the millions of years that hominids have been on the planet, how did they communicate? They communicated emotionally, but non-verbally. So our brains evolved to pick up on all kinds of emotional cues. And all we have to do is just quiet our minds for a moment, and our brains will automatically start processing the emotions that the speaker is experiencing. And then I teach us a way of structuring emotions so that you can pick out the emotion. You can chunk the emotions very easily and quickly. And it makes it much easier and faster to know what to say and how to say it. But my rubric is ignore the words, read the emotions, reflect back the emotions with a you statement. So I would say something like, "Oh, Rebecca, you're really angry. You feel disrespected. You don't feel heard. You don't feel appreciated. You don't feel supported. And you're worried and anxious. And you're sad. And you're upset and distressed because you've lost connection. And you feel a little bit of embarrassment. And you feel completely abandoned and rejected and unloved."
Wow. So you're not just reflecting back the words, you're reflecting back the emotion that is conveyed in the words. And wow, that can make someone feel so heard.
How did that just feel for you?
Yeah, it felt wonderful.
Right.
Yeah.
That is true. That is true empathic listening. It's called affect labeling. And there are brain scanning studies, as I said, that show that what happens in every human brain when you do this. So it's not just listening to the words. Sometimes you do listen to the words, and it's important to listen to the words, but other times it's important to listen to the emotions. And these are the skills that I just developed this in 2005 and started teaching it in our Prison of Peace project in 2010. It's the foundational skill, and when we're teaching incarcerated people how to be mediators and peacemakers to stop prison violence, it's the first skill we teach them, because everything in mediation and peacemaking is based on the ability to listen and de-escalate.
Right, right.
When you were talking about listening with the whole body, that caught my attention too. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, I call it, it might have a different term, but I call it active listening. But
Okay.
I noticed that when I would work with my hypnotherapy clients, especially that first appointment where I was gathering a lot of information, I would feel a little exhausted after because I would really be, I mean, my mind would be quiet and I'd be very focused, but I could feel my whole body responding to everything that they were, and now that you say that too, Doug, about everything that they were experiencing emotionally, I'm sure I was very tuned into, and also their words. I was taking notes if something seemed, real relevant that I wanted to remember, or if there was something I wanted to ask a question about when they were done talking. So I would feel just like a physical, it was a good feeling, but I would feel tired after, and it felt like a very active practice. So that's kind of what I mean by
It's cognitively taxing.
yeah.
If you're really focused on everything that the person is saying,
Yes.
it can be exhausting.
Yeah, and not in a bad way, it
No,
was, I mean, it was, yeah, it was very fulfilling. I had no idea it was going to be that fulfilling, being able to do that for people. But that's what I mean by listening with my whole body.
okay. It's interesting you use the term active listening. I tell people don't use that word with me.
Oh yeah? Oh yeah, how come?
The term was coined by Thomas Gordon, who was a psychologist in the 1950s who studied under Carl Rogers. They were both professors at the University of Wisconsin-Madison.
Mhm.
And he developed this whole thing around active listening. And he thought that interpersonal conflict evolved when people blame the other person. So, you did this to me, or you're this kind of a person, or you're a bad person. So he said, when you're in a conflict situation, don't use you statements, use I statements. And it was absolutely right.
Mhm.
When you do X, when X happens, I feel Y, and then you make a request. Would you consider doing so and so? And that's what he taught. But it got perverted in the human potential movement in the 1960s. And it got perverted to where, oh, what I hear you saying is that you're angry. This passive voice, stupid stuff. And I can tell you, as a mediator and a peacemaker and a professor, that kind of active listening where you're saying, what I hear you saying is, only pisses people off. It doesn't work. It never has worked. It never will work.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with
And,
that.
and yet you hear people use the term active listening.
Mm.
And as soon as they do, I know that they don't know what they're talking about.
Yeah. So
They're showing their ignorance.
so I just didn't know what I was talking about when I was
Well,
talking.
but except that I know you're a great listener and written a really beautiful book about it. That's why I was curious about why you used the term. And it's probably because, I mean, I didn't know the history of active listening until I decided to dive into it. So where did this all come from? And then I found out that you've heard of nonviolent communication, Marshall Rosenberg's system, right? That's
Yeah.
another system that doesn't work. But Rosenberg also went to the University of Wisconsin-Madison about 20 years after Gordon.
Oh, really?
And when you look at nonviolent communication and Gordon's work, they're identical.
Really? Oh, that's
So I'm
interesting.
thinking that Rosenberg stumbled onto, I don't know this for a fact, Rosenberg's dead, so we can't ask him, but I suspect that he discovered Gordon's work and rebranded it as nonviolent communication. I wrote a whole blog article on this on my website.
Oh. So Doug, what do you think would be a better word, a better term than active listening?
Reflective listening.
Oh, I like that. I like that.
Reflective
Yeah.
listening. We make a huge distinction because when you're doing reflective listening, you are reflecting the speaker's words and emotions and meaning. See, words, meaning, and emotion. Three things that you have to reflect from the speaker's frame of reference, which is why in the way I teach it, you always use you statements and you never ask questions. Because the moment you start asking questions, it becomes your agenda.
Mm.
And if you really want to have somebody feel deeply heard, it's their agenda. Whatever they want to talk about is okay. All you do is reflect what they're feeling and experiencing and meaning.
Mm.
So we use paraphrasing, which everybody's familiar with, for reflecting the words. We use core messaging for reflecting the meaning that the speaker is trying to convey but can't. And we use affect labeling for reflecting the emotional experience the speaker is having in the moment, all using you statements.
Yeah, that's great.
Interesting, huh?
Yeah, it really is. It really is.
And I've taught this, I've acid tested it in maximum security prisons for the last 13 years, and I've taught it in schools, and I use it in my peacemaking work all the time. And
That's good.
I have people who I facilitate difficult conversations. And what I say in the difficult conversations is, this is not about a difficult conversation. This is an exercise in listening and reflecting.
Yeah, it makes me really happy that you're doing that work. It's such important work.
Well, yeah, I think that's why I wanted to amplify your work too, because you're doing the same thing. What are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing these days? Like, I mean, you're promoting the book? Are you out teaching, training, giving talks on the book?
Yeah, I used to speak in the past, and I don't really do that anymore. I'm not really doing anything in those lines of work anymore. I'm
Okay.
doing completely different things. Yeah.
Right.
Another chapter. Yeah.
Another chapter. All right. And
Chapter.
you're living in Florida at the moment. So,
Yep. Yeah.
well, great. Well, what other tips can you give us for those that are learning from both of us in this conversation? What other tips have you picked up over the years that you think is really useful and important?
Some other tips as far as listening concerned. Yeah. Boy, there's so many. One of the big things I think I would say is to be gentle. If you've decided that you want to really get better at this skill, to be gentle with yourself in the process. You know, wanting to improve that skill and taking the first steps is huge. So just be gentle with yourself as you're doing it. Because like I said, when I started listening very intently and learning how to do that, I would feel tired after. And it would be difficult for me sometimes in the beginning. It got a lot easier, but it would be difficult for me to bite my tongue and not interject something that I felt was like so important to say at this moment. A big thing that I've learned is that it's okay to let go of what you feel is so important, what's happening in your own mind. It's okay to let that go. It's more important to really be there and be focused and listening on what someone is sharing with
That's right.
you. Yeah.
It's what Eckhart Tolle calls being in the presence of now.
Yes.
And what I've learned is that when you listen, at least listen to emotions, you are in the presence of now. You become ego. It's a very transcendent experience. It's almost it's almost a spiritual practice.
I agree.
Where you become completely egoless, ego-free,
Mm.
and all your whole concentration is focused on listening to and understanding and reflecting the emotions of another person.
Yeah,
It's
and you know,
quite a remarkable place to be.
it really is. That's a great way of putting it. And another beautiful piece of that is when you are able to do that and you set your own agenda aside and set all the important things that you just have to say aside, then that person who's sharing with you, it's so beautiful. They open up, they go deep,
Yes,
they go deeper, they
that's right.
share more, and
That's right.
it's this incredibly bonding, connecting experience with another human.
That has
It's
been, mhm.
yeah.
That has been exactly my experience, and everybody I've taught, that when you start listening to somebody in a deep way, they feel emotionally safe, but many times for the very first time in their life. And so
Yeah.
now they open up and they
Yeah.
start talking. And I just had this experience the other night. We had a couple over for dinner, neighbors of ours that live a couple of miles over on the other, we all live in the mountains here, so they were a couple of mountains over. But he was he's he's taciturn, nice guy, super nice guy. But for the first time since I've met him, he opened up at dinner and started talking about himself and his family and his background, and actually started crying over some stories with his father. And I think it's because for the first time he felt really emotionally safe. And my wife's very skilled at this too, and in our presence. And his wife commented in a text to Alea that she's never seen him like that. She's never seen him open up to anybody like that before.
I love stories like that. And it's true. That's the way we get closer to people and connect to people, and I think help each other heal.
Oh, absolutely. And you know, the other thing about it, it's a priceless gift, yet it costs nothing to give.
I know. I love that.
Isn't that amazing?
Yes.
And all we have to do is learn how to do it, and we can give it out anytime we want. It costs us nothing but a few seconds of time,
Yeah.
and we just enrich people's lives by being able to listen them into existence.
Yeah. I'm always surprised when people share, I mean, close friends, that's less surprising, but just acquaintances, it's surprising when people share such deep, personal, special things with me. And I know that what I'm doing in that moment is holding that space and listening. And I've had people say after, you know, I don't tell very many people that. I don't know why I just got into that or went off on that. And I feel honored.
Yes, yes, it's a sacred place that we
Yeah.
create when we listen to people.
Yeah. That's a really nice story about your dinner guests.
Yeah,
That's,
well, and it's not unusual. You know, I facilitate difficult conversations, and I did one. It's actually, I've got it posted on my YouTube channel, The Power of Emotional Competency, a month or two ago, with a young couple who went to Hawaii to break up. And they decided to have a difficult conversation with me. And I walked them through listening to each other at a very deep level, a lot of tears and crying, recorded on YouTube. And they texted me on WhatsApp on Sunday, and they got back together again and had figured out how to communicate and listen to each other. That's all it took.
that gives me goosebumps.
I mean, what else can you want in life other than stuff like that, right?
I know. That's
So,
awesome.
I mean, just when you start learning these skills, you can do such amazing things. You don't have to become a Mother Teresa to do good work in the world, to create meaning. All you have to do is learn how to listen.
Yeah,
And
I
then go out and
agree.
practice it.
Yeah, I agree so much, Doug. I love that. I feel like you're speaking my language. It's really nice.
I figured we would have a lot in common.
Yeah.
Any other advice you would give to people on how they could get, if they're listening to us and they're getting inspired about how to become a better listener? What steps would you say to take? Read your book. Right?
Yeah,
Read my book. Read my
yeah.
fourth book. Buy our books.
Oh, thank you. Thanks, Doug. Yeah, I'm very proud of that little book. I am. It's very thin. You can read it in about a half an hour, but it's got some gems in there. I've never talked to anybody who has said that they didn't take something away from that they're trying to put into practice.
Yeah.
You can also look up online, you know, ideas on becoming a better listener, and maybe just get a couple of ideas with that. But being aware. What
I'm going to say, I've read a lot of articles online about listening, and I would say 98% of it's garbage.
Okay, so cancel what I just said about that.
Read Rebecca's book. Hey, are you listening to me? Listing Your Way to Professional and Personal Success, available on Amazon and all the usual places. Google it. I did. You can find it everywhere. That's where it started. And then if you want to get my stuff up in the show notes, I'll put notes about de-escalate, how to calm an angry person in 90 seconds or less, which is about my kind of stuff.
Yeah, great.
One final question I always like to ask my guests: tell us one thing about yourself that we wouldn't know unless you told us.
Oh, let's see. And does it have to do with listening? Just
nope. Whatever. So just something very interesting about yourself that no one would ever know.
Oh, that's some pressure. Something very interesting that no one would ever know. Well, I guess the listeners do kind of know this now, but the thing about me is that I have a very adventurous spirit. I like risk-taking activities. I like to make myself uncomfortable. I just recently signed up for an improv class, and I'm about 2 months into that, but I really enjoy doing things that make me very uncomfortable on a somewhat regular basis. It just pushes me out of myself. It gets me out of my comfort zone. I feel very alive, very stimulated. And it's something that sometimes I drag my feet on the way to it, but I really do like feeling uncomfortable and pushing my limits.
I love that. I love that.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy day to chat with me and my audience. And I just really appreciate the work you're doing. And I hope you'll continue to propagate the power of listening to the people around you.
I will. And I appreciate what you're doing too. And Doug, thank you so much. This was such a pleasure. Thank you.
You're welcome, Rebecca.